Hello, this is a narrated time-lapse of the picture that I produce here. It is a portrait of Ahsoka from Star Wars. This is, as you can see, a standard portrait that I usually do. I like the types of lighting involved, and I typically like to saturate the colour and apply a whole load of texture using the ArtRage brush and overlaying some textures on top. So this is what we're going to be doing. Starting off with a blank canvas and laying down initially using the oil brush. I'm laying down some simple colours. I'm using a reference, which is just because our Ahsoka at the moment has only been on TV in cartoon form, so I'm working off a cartoon-based reference. And my idea for this is to make her look more lifelike, like a real person. And therefore I'm going to put in the normal proportions of a human being rather than the slightly stylized, characterized version of the cartoon. At the moment, I'm keeping things small at thumbnail level, which I typically do right at the start. And my canvas size is going to be quite small. I think it's going to be about 1,000 by 1,000-ish right at the start. And as I work along, I gradually increase the size as I start to build up the detail. You can see there I'm going into warp, which is very useful. Warp is very useful for portraits, because it only takes very small things to make a portrait look either good or slightly off. Playing around with the lighting, I try and keep the lighting as dark as possible when I'm first working on a portrait, because I do tend to go too light, and I typically generally start to build up the light on top, but I get a bit too carried away sometimes and it tends to look quite lifeless. So I try and keep things as dark as possible, as you can see there. 2 layers typically. I am here, as you can see, I'm doing a bit of blending. I'm experimenting a bit this time. I don't typically blend too much. I like to use the oil brush a lot. There you can see I'm forcing the light where I just overlaid a multiply layer with the gradient tool to give a different type of light, and then I was just basically erasing away to give more form to the face. Here I am using the soft palette knife, which is probably my favourite tool in ArtRage, I think, in the fact that it really does move the paint around and gives you some very definitive edges, so very clear edges, which is what a lot of artwork is all about. And it's just really fun to use. It's responsive, and once you've got all the oil laid down with the oil brush, it works so well. And also you can blend slightly with it as well, and it gives a nice natural look. Here I'm going with a stiff blend, playing around with some blends. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do necessarily. I'm trying to get the iris and the pupil in the right place with the eyes, but I'm struggling with it at the moment. Not really sure it's working too well. This is a little trick I use sometimes. This is a former piece of artwork that I've done, which is Cersei off Game of Thrones. Just overlay that one in, typically using the overlay blend layer, playing around with it, playing around with opacity, and just seeing what happens for an idea. And there you can see I just merged it down because I was happy with how it turned out and happy with the lighting aspect of it. The idea is starting to take shape now. I had a rough idea at the start that I wanted to make Ahsoka fairly normal looking, human looking, based upon the cartoon. Here I'm looking for the almost insignia on her face, and I was trying an overlay layer with a quite light colour to see how that would look, but that didn't really work too well. Trying to build some lights up here using, again, an overlay layer to give it a bit more interest and to make the image pop, because it's still fairly dark at the moment. I want to try and bring the colours out a bit more at the moment. Just trying to find it. Not really using too much reference here, just what's in my head regarding, because I've done quite a lot of portraits in my time, regarding trying to get the form to come out and trying to make it look human. Now I merge down into a single layer. I lost the background. What I typically do is have 2 layers, one in the background and then one in the foreground, which is the main layer that I work on. I typically try and stick to one layer because it just works well in ArtRage with all the paint on one layer, and you can merge it around and move it around a bit. Now I've isolated the background layer. It makes life a lot easier. Just having a look at the values there, I'm just using a color layer to see how the values are getting on. And as you can see, I just thought about doing the irises again, but I'm not sure if it's really going to work. I think I'm going to have to leave her eyes fairly blank. It's a bit of a cheat really, but I think it's going to look more effective, and it's just a pain in the arse to try and get these things in the right place. Deciding that it's looking a bit rough, the face, so I'm going to experiment a bit with blending. And these were 3 blending brushes which I've created, and I think they're based upon the canvas brush as part of the new modified tool, the alternative to the sticker spray, the custom brush. And as you can see here, I'm getting some nice blending happening. And this is a new introduction into ArtRage 5, the custom brush, which has really opened some doors regarding blending from me. I always use the oil brush to lay down the paint initially. It's quite difficult to blend with the oil brush typically within ArtRage. And what I'm doing is I'm using the custom blenders that I have created, which give me the kind of blend that I would like. Especially in portraits, it's very, very important to get the blend right and really add some smoothness to the face. But I do still like to preserve the overall ArtRage painterly look, and that will come in a little bit afterwards. I won't blend it too much. After the blend here, it will look a bit blurry, but then I can start reintroducing the edges again. I can start finding them again, and that's when the palette knife comes in. In a way, it's quite interesting. It's working as traditional as I can get, laying down the paint initially and then starting to blend around a bit and then finding the edges again and then introducing the brush strokes. Here I'm using the airbrush in an overlay mode again to bring out the highlights, which is always very useful and very useful on a portrait as well. Blending along with using an airbrush really does bring out some nice gradients. Soft palette knife now coming in and starting to define the edges, especially important around the eyes and the nose, and a lot of the time on the top lip around the mouth, and the jawline is all very important. So I'm just finding those again after I've gone through the blending. Really good fun this, playing around, because it's just pushing paint around. And this is the beauty of doing everything on a single layer. I can just, and the thing is, use a single layer, it's digital art, I can change it any way I want to. I can delete things, I can warp things, I can do anything I want to. I don't really need a whole load of different layers. Again, a bit of rotation, because I was trying to find the edges around her headdress, and the easiest way for me to do that was just to rotate the canvas around. It's not something I do particularly often. I like to keep the canvas pretty static, but there it was just easier for me to do. And also useful to flip, of course, because you can see the painting in a completely new light, and you just know whether it looks any good or not. You can just tell immediately. Just going through, starting to get down to the small details now. I think I'm generally pretty happy with the lighting. I think that will do quite nicely. Bit of warping here because I thought the far eye didn't quite look right. Although there will be a certain amount of perspective, there won't be a massive amount of perspective, which will make that eye look significantly smaller than the one towards the camera. Here is something that I don't usually do, but I thought I'd play around, is using the selection tool for the tattoo insignia on her face, is to define where it is and then to use the fill tool to put in a colour and probably reduce the opacity to get it to sit on top nicely. And of course, using the select tool, I get some nice sharp edges. I've seen quite a few tutorials, people on YouTube using this method, and I've never really ever used it, and I thought this is a prime opportunity to do it, and I think it seems to be okay. I think I'm going to use that in the future. And this is where I typically do use layers. This is the great thing about layers. I can keep that in a separate thing until I'm happy with it, but I want to be as brave as possible a lot of the time and actually merge down as soon as I can possibly do it. It does allow, I think, more flexibility for when I start pushing paint around. Playing around with getting some rim light and pushing the colours a bit more if I possibly can do. Again, this is where the details start coming in. And also trying to get some brush strokes in there as well. I've would have put on a separate layer here and I would have got some thick paint, and I'm really trying to lay those brush strokes on top to get the painterly look. Again, trying to come back to the irises, just not getting it, just not looking good. Even trying the warp there to see if I can warp it into something that looks, I mean, I almost got it, but it still looked a bit weird. And in the end, I started playing around with some blend modes, trying to reduce the impact of them, and I never really quite got it. I think I just got her eyes to be slightly bright in the end, and that was about as much as I could get. I wasn't going to be too bothered about that. I think it would be okay. It's very difficult to get those in the right place. Looking for find some rim light now. This will be another overlay layer, and trying to subtly find some light. As you can see, I've got the airbrush again. Playing around a bit here with some colours, some complementary colours. You could see I was using the blue to complement the orange colours. This is experimentation here and seeing what I can start to bring out. Very wary of overdoing things and pushing things too much. And the background, I've now got this on a separate layer, and I had an idea to keep this very simple. It's going to be some kind of spaceship, Star Wars type backgrounds, and I'm using the oil brush here on very thick paint and putting some colours on top so I get some blurring, merging in, and then I'm applying the native plugin, which is the blur plugin, and that will push everything to the back, and I could get away with doing the paint and the background seeing very rough because I knew I was going to blur it. Here is a few final details, trimming the edges a bit. At this point, I do like to blur the face slightly to get more of a cinematic look and to make it look a bit more 3D. Now you have the background, which is blurred in the background. The face looks a bit flat, and that's why I like to do a bit of blurring and soften the edges slightly. Again, I'm using the warp as I go along, pushing things around a bit. I'm not too far away from finishing now, I think. I want to apply a smidge of texture and also do a final tweak, I think, which is what I typically do. Once I have got it into ArtRage, I tend to export it either into GIMP or into Picasa and tweak the colours very slightly to bring the colours out, to tweak the contrast, get everything to sit in properly, maybe the colours tiny amount, but I think the colours are pretty good and not a million miles away here. I'm getting to the point now that I'm almost noodling. I tend to like to finish a painting, I wouldn't say before it's finished, but I really don't want to overdo things. I want to keep things nice and simple, otherwise I'll lose the impact. I'm playing around with an overlay layer and the sticker spray. I wanted some textures in there, and as you can see there's some quite bold things going on, and I'm just really reducing the opacity to get a subtle effect. I wanted more texture on the face, but I think I've got some good texture now on a headdress. And playing around some different blend modes, getting things to sit in. And now exporting to Picasa. It's a simple tool. I know it's not really updated anymore, but it just allows a few tweaks. I typically sharpen things up very slightly, bring the colors out a bit more, and it just adds that extra sheen on, and then export it and import it back into ArtRage. And imported it in, and you can see the difference there. There was quite a big difference in what it looked like when it came back in, and that is almost it. And it would just be a case of setting an extra layer and signing it off, and that's pretty much the painting finished overall. Just one quick flip check to see that everything looks okay. Speed it up a bit here just to, that's the signature going in there. And there we go. That is my portrait of Ahsoka. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Bye.